Good evening, welcome to Scotland at 7. I'm Gordon Ross. First of all, tonight's coronavirus update. As of 2 p.m. today, a total of 1,157,632 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and the UK government's regional testing centres. Of these, 1,065,446 were confirmed negative, while 92,186 were positive. There are 1,225 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. There are 51 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive today. This will be an underestimate of the number of cases. Not everyone with the virus will display the symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. Of the people who have tested positive, 1,161 were in hospital last night, 84 of whom were in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by coronavirus COVID-19 infection now stands at 3,639. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures published today show that 57,031 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 498 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just hospitals. And now there are some changes to public health travel rules. Travellers arriving in Scotland from Estonia and Latvia must quarantine for 14 days at home or another address from 4 a.m. on Saturday, the 28th of November. A significant increase in cases of coronavirus COVID-19 in those countries, as well as a rise in the number of cases testing positive and the associated risk of importation into Scotland, has led to the decisions to remove exemption status. At the same time, a number of destinations are being added to the list of countries and territories where travellers will be exempt from quarantine on arrival in Scotland, and they are Aruba, Bhutan, Israel, Jerusalem, Kiribati, Micronesia, Mongolia, Namibia, Northern Mariana Islands, Rwanda, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Sri Lanka, Timor-Leste, Tonga, Uruguay, Vanuatu, and the Caribbean islands of the US Virgin Islands, Bonaire, St. Eustatius, and Saba. The enhanced travel controls which prevented visitors arriving into the UK from Denmark will also be removed this Saturday. However, anyone arriving into the UK from Denmark will still be required to isolate for 14 days. The regulations will also make some minor amendments to sectoral exemptions related to state business, diplomatic missions, and subsea telecommunications workers. Now, if you'd like to join the conversation here tonight, I'm sorry, I was just going to say, if you'd like to join the conversation tonight, you can usually do so by Twitter, but since we are not having guests this evening, unfortunately that will not be available. And now to tonight's main stories. I do also apologise for us starting late this evening. This was due to circumstances beyond our control. And now, first story of this evening. And there's been a response to the House of Lords' rejection of key clauses of the UK government's Internal Markets Bill. Commenting at the end of a series of decisive defeats for the UK government Internal Market Bill in the House of Lords, the Cabinet Secretary for the Constitution, Europe and External Affairs, Michael Russell, said, "For a government bill to be so comprehensively demolished in the House of Lords is almost unheard of, and it is now completely untenable for UK ministers to proceed with their deeply flawed Internal Market Bill." Members of the House of Lords have already thrown out aspects of the bill that amounted to a flagrant breach of international law, and now peers have identified and removed a number of threats to devolution and the democratic accountability of the Scottish Parliament, which the bill contains. The Scottish Parliament has already rejected this deeply damaging piece of legislation, and if the UK government had any shred of respect for devolution left, then the bill should be scrapped on these grounds alone. When the bill returns to the Commons in December, we urge the UK government to acknowledge both the fundamental opposition of Scottish MSPs and the forensic and principled criticism the bill has received in the Lords, and to cease this unprecedented, unnecessary and deeply damaging assault on devolution. Now, also today, the UK's delivery prices have jumped ahead of the Brexit cliff edge as firms rush to stockpile. UK businesses are rushing to stockpile goods just 5 weeks before the post-Brexit customs checks come into force on January the 1st, driving up the cost of cross-border deliveries and cutting capacity. The frantic activity reflects rising concerns that Britain's final departure from the world's biggest trading bloc will bring chaos at its frontiers, as companies struggle to navigate a full customs border for the first time since 1993. Logistics companies are reporting that they have seen a surge in demand to bring goods into the country before any potential disruption in January. And customs agents report being overwhelmed by pleas for help from traders grappling with the rules for the first time. Companies had stockpiled goods before the previous Brexit deadlines, but many have held off this time, weakened by the COVID-19 hit to cash flow. Along with the rush to bring in goods, companies are also having to prepare to deal with customs declarations. The UK's logistics industry estimates that 250 million customs declarations a year will be needed for EU trade. The Road Haulage Association estimates that it will require some 50,000 customs agents, compared with between 5,000 and 10,000 now. While the government has provided £84 million to train staff, many companies in the small sector have refused to take on workers before they know how the new system will work. Those companies that can provide customs are therefore in huge demand. Now, experts have warned that the Chancellor's plans could lead to £40 billion of austerity cuts. The SNP has said that the Chancellor's spending plans make it clear that the only way to protect Scotland's families and to escape austerity is with independence, after experts warned that they could lead to £40 billion of further austerity cuts. Speaking today in an online briefing session, the director of the Institute of Fiscal Studies, Paul Johnson, said if the Chancellor did want to aim for current budget balance, he'd eventually need 2% of national income fiscal tightening, about £40 billion in today's terms. He added that the public sector pay freeze seemed driven by politics, not economics, nor the need to spend money either equitably or efficiently, and that this was no way to either spend public money or to treat public sector workers. The IFS also renewed calls for the UK government to make the universal credit increase permanent. And if it is not going to do so, then it should say so explicitly and give people time to prepare and avoid a nasty shock. The SNP has repeatedly called on the Tory government to make the £20 boost to universal credit and working tax credits permanent and extend that same support to legacy benefits to prevent 4.5 million families losing out on £1,000 a year and 700,000 people being plunged into poverty. Now, there's also been a warning of a 15-year income squeeze with the pay cut by £12,000 a year by 2025. The SNP has said that the Chancellor's spending plans make it clear that the only way to protect Scotland's families and escape austerity is with independence, after experts warned that they could lead to a further £40 billion of austerity cuts. I beg your pardon, I think we've read this story before. Apologies. Okay, I beg your pardon. It's an extension of this previous story. The IFS also renewed calls for the UK government to make the universal credit increase permanent. And if it's not going to do so, I think we seem to have I think the story's been repeated. Beg your pardon. We'll return to that later on. Now, a third of England is facing the toughest COVID curbs, it seems. More than 20 million people across large swathes of England will be forced to live under the toughest category of COVID-19 restrictions when the first English national lockdown ends on December the 2nd, although London was placed on high alert, the second toughest tier. English Health Minister Matt Hancock today announced final details of a regional system set to take effect when blanket restrictions on England's 55 million population end after a month-long lockdown, setting out the terms of daily life for the country's citizens and businesses. Hope is on the horizon, but we still have further to go, so we must all dig deep. The end is in sight, and we mustn't give up now, Hancock told Parliament, alluding to growing prospects for a vaccine against the coronavirus in the coming months. Now, Boris Johnson has appointed Dan Rosenfield to be his number 10 Chief of Staff. Mr Johnson has appointed Dan Rosenfield, a relatively little-known former Treasury official and banker, to become his Chief of Staff, a key part of a reorganisation process following the departure of Dominic Cummings. Rosenfield currently works for Hackroot, an upmarket corporate advisory firm that has a number of former intelligence members amongst its staff. He'll take over from Edward Lister, Johnson's longtime aide and interim Chief of Staff, on January the 1st. Rosenfield, who is Hackroot's global head of corporate clients and runs the UK side of the business, formerly held a senior role at the Bank of America. He spent more than 10 years as an official at the Treasury, acting as the principal private secretary to Alistair Darling and George Osborne when they were Chancellors from 2007 to 2011. And now to the Lockerbie bombing. And the Lockerbie bombing appeal is to conclude to consider its decision. After 6 years of preparations and investigations, the appeal court hearing into the posthumous appeal of the late Ali Megrahi concluded today. In just under a month, the 32nd anniversary of the murderous attack on Lockerbie will take place. The Megrahi family expressed gratitude to their legal team for their unconditional support and hope that their journey is finally coming to an end. And now to America. Donald Trump has pardoned his former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who had twice pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI during an investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 presidential election. Trump's pardon, which could be the first of several after he lost the 2020 presidential election to the Democrat Joe Biden, drew condemnation from Democrats and other critics. A retired Army general, Flynn pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI about interactions he had with Russia's ambassador to the United States in the weeks leading up to Trump's inauguration in January 2017. Trump's move is the highest profile pardon that he has granted since he took office. Among others, the Republican president has pardoned Army personnel accused of war crimes in Afghanistan and Joe Arpaio, a former Arizona sheriff and a hardliner against illegal immigration. This pardon is undeserved, unprincipled, and one more stain on President Trump's rapidly diminishing legacy, the House of Representatives Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler said in a statement. The House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called it an act of grave corruption and a brazen abuse of power. Now it seems that time is running out to find a Brexit agreement on Gibraltar. Time is running out to find a Brexit agreement between Spain and the UK over Gibraltar. The Spanish Foreign Minister Arantxa González Lea said today, at stake in the talks is avoiding a hard European border in southern Spain after the UK completes its departure from the EU at the end of this year. Spain ceded Gibraltar, a rocky enclave near its southern tip, to the United Kingdom in 1713 after a war, but claims sovereignty over it. About 15,000 people commute daily from Spain into Gibraltar, which has a population of 32,000. Spain has agreed to put aside the issue of sovereignty and its claim to one side for now and to focus on the opportunity to keep the border with Gibraltar open. And now, abused women must be able to access help. The Scottish Greens health spokesperson, Alison Johnson, has supported calls for all health services to be able to respond to and to support women suffering from domestic violence after the UN called violence against women a shadow pandemic. Speaking in a parliamentary debate to mark the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, Alison Johnson highlighted the latest figures from the femicide census, which shows that on average a woman was murdered every 3 days across the United Kingdom. Alison Johnson said the femicide report reveals that the killing of a woman, especially in a domestic setting, is often reported as an isolated incident and giving no cause for wider public concern. But as the figures I just quoted painfully illustrate, there's every cause for wider public concern. These deaths frequently represent the failure of authorities to protect women from violence at the hands of men. She added, "We need a no wrong door policy for women who are seeking help. Interactions with healthcare often present vital opportunities to identify cases of domestic abuse, but these opportunities have been limited during the pandemic. During current restrictions, we need to make sure that women have opportunities to come forward and that they get the support they need." And now to the European Parliament. The European Parliament has expressed solidarity with Poland during abortion protests. The European Parliament has accused Poland's nationalist government of improperly influencing a court that imposed a near total ban on abortion, which it said showed that the rule of law had collapsed in Poland. The EU Parliament's resolution, which passed today with 455 votes for and 145 against and 71 abstentions, comes after right-wing governments in Poland and Hungary vetoed the EU budget and a COVID-19 recovery fund this month, after countries sought to tie the funds to adherence to the rule of law. Since coming to power in 2015, Poland's ruling Law and Justice Party has clashed with the European Union over judiciary reforms, which the bloc says violate democratic standards. The PIS has rejected such accusations. Hundreds of Poles have taken to the streets since October the 22nd Constitutional Tribunal, a ruling that sharply limited Poland's already restrictive abortion laws. The protests have seen a broader outpouring of anger at Poland's nationalist rulers, with many criticising the judiciary reforms and saying that they say that have allowed the PIS to hand-pick judges for its high courts to push through its controversial decisions. The motion from members of the European Parliament underlines the aforementioned ruling is yet another example of the political takeover of the judiciary and the systemic collapse of the rule of law in Poland. Well, that's almost it for this evening's slightly shorter version of Scotland at 7, but I would just like to remind you that we are currently running a fundraiser for Broadcasting Scotland. So if you'd like to contribute and help us to make more programmes in the future and to hire permanent staff, you can do so by contacting us on our website. We should also be screening a video shortly, which will explain everything. Anyway, from okay, I beg your pardon. We do have a video which outlines plans for the future, and we hope that you will dig deep and help us to make new programs for the future. Here's the video now.
The Catalans, the Basques, the Galicians in the Basque.
An independent future for Scotland.
How quickly do you think a referendum can be arranged?
Best practice demands that it should be 6 months.
Just looking at the overall share numbers for Scotland at the moment, the SNP 46.4%.
So as you can see, we have big plans ahead for the coming year. So if you'd like to help us by joining in the crowdfunder, please do so by following the instructions on your screen now. You can also become a regular supporter of Scotland at 7 in the normal way. But anyway, that's it for a slightly abbreviated Scotland at 7 this evening. We are hoping that we will have a full set of staff for next week. Anyway, that's it from a rather lonely studio here this evening, but I'll be back again on Monday. And in the meantime, I believe Kenny will be presenting the show tomorrow evening. So that's it from Scotland at 7. I'll see you again next week. Good night.